Hello, I have a question. What if the most influential people in history were chosen not for their power, but for how spectacularly ordinary they were? Imagine a superhero team assembled from your local bowling league. Well, that's basically what Jesus did. So let's face it, if you were picking a team to change the world, you'd probably scroll past the fishermen and tax collectors on LinkedIn. Well, not Jesus. So let's talk about Peter, Andrew, James, and John. These guys were fishermen. Their biggest claim to fame was probably the size of their last catch and their ability to tie a mean knot. Yet, when Jesus called, they dropped their nets faster than you drop a phone on your face in bed. No job interviews, no background checks. Just follow me. And off they went. As for Matthew, he worked for the Romans collecting taxes. So, in modern terms, he was the guy who shows up when you're least expecting it, asking awkward questions about your receipts. He was about as popular as a wasp at a picnic. Yet Jesus invited him in. As for Simon, he was a political radical, the kind of guy who'd have a bumper sticker for every cause. He and Matthew probably didn't agree on much, except that Jesus was worth following. Thomas, he needed proof. He's the original Pixar It Didn't Happen guy. But Jesus didn't mind the questions, he welcomed them. So Jesus' crew was more the average Joes than the Avengers. And that was the point. God's biggest plans often start with the most unlikely people. The disciples weren't saints in waiting. They were more like us on a Monday morning, confused, tired, and sometimes a little grumpy. Peter was the king of act first, think later guy. He once promised he'd never deny Jesus. Then, he did it 3 times before the rooster could finish his morning routine. Yet, he bounced back and became the church's rock. Well, think about a plot twist. Matthew had to face shame and exclusion. Once he threw a dinner party for Jesus and his old tax collector friends. The menu was kosher, but the guest list was scandalous. The religious leaders were horrified and were asking, "He eats with them." But Jesus was all about turning outsiders into insiders. Thomas was a skeptic. Thomas wanted to see some receipts, literally. Jesus didn't scold him. He just said, "Go ahead, check out the scars." Sometimes faith means asking hard questions, and that's okay. They had collective fears as well. They argued over who was the best. Imagine a who's the teacher's pet contest. Mark 9:34. They couldn't always heal when they tried. Mark 9:18. Jesus basically said, you need more faith and maybe a little more prayer. When things got tough, they scattered faster than kids when someone says, "Who broke the vase?" Matthew 26:56. Yet, every failure was a lesson. Jesus turned their oops moment into opportunities. What made the disciples stand out wasn't their perfection, it was their honesty. They weren't afraid to say, "Jesus, we're going to need a little more faith over here." Luke 17:5. No pretending, no spiritual flexing. Matthew knew what it felt like to be left out. Peter knew what it was like to mess up. Their stories make us feel like maybe, just maybe, there's hope for us too. They ask questions, lots of them. "Jesus, can you show us how to pray?" Their journey was messy and real. Faith wasn't about having it all together. It was about showing up again and again. Their pivotal moment was the feeding of the 5,000. Imagine a crowd of 5,000 hungry people, and the disciples have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Not exactly a banquet, more like a set picnic. The disciples' solution: send them home, Jesus. We are fresh out of breadsticks. Jesus' solution: let's see what you've got. They hand over their meager lunch, and Jesus turns it into a feast with leftover for days. So God isn't asking for what you don't have, just what you're willing to give, even if it is a couple of fish and a little faith. So the disciples' small acts, serving, sharing, loving, created ripples that still reach us today. They didn't always know, what they were doing. Who does? But they showed up, and that was enough. Jesus' message was clear. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. 1 Corinthians 1:27. The disciples went from, who, me, to, here I am. The greatness wasn't in their skill, but in their willingness to let God use them. Our flaws, they are just classrooms for grace. Our availability, that's God's favorite ingredient. So think of an ordinary person, a parent, teacher, friend, who made a difference in your life through simple, faithful actions. Their story proves that ordinary is the new extraordinary. So what's in your lunchbox?